The impact a story has on the listener often depends on if they believe it or not. Urban legends, chilling stories of the bizarre, or tales of ironic twists of fate often play with our sense of gullibility. Is it true or not? I'm Natasha Henstridge, and for the next hour, we'll answer just that question as we reveal the truth behind famous urban legends. Identity theft is a modern problem, wrecking the lives of thousands of people each year. But here's an urban legend where the real horror is not losing your identity, but gaining one you didn't want.
Our story begins on a college campus where a graduate student in psychology is brainstorming ideas for his master's thesis. He needs to find a new and unique angle on psychotherapy, something to make his professors sit up and take notice. His girlfriend suggests he go out and get some real-world experience before writing up his paper. And her suggestion plants in his mind what he thinks is a great idea. A week later, our graduate student makes a visit to a local psychiatric hospital to put his plan into action.
I'm not from around here. I'm from another planet.
He decides to feign mental illness.
I'm here to help you.
And get himself admitted to the clinic as a psychiatric patient. He'll write his psychology thesis from a patient's point of view.
Microwave beams into my head.
Insisting to the doctor that he must wear a protective headpiece to prevent the CIA from beaming microwaves into his brain, he puts on a convincing show. And the doctor agrees to hold him for observation.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to call you back and say...
I think you need to stay with us. Orderly? Why don't you go with this nice gentleman?
The student is escorted out of the office and shown to his nice, comfy room. The next day, he's put through a series of tests to determine his sanity. Said and done, the doctor concludes that our grad student requires inpatient care. It's then that the student triumphantly reveals his little scheme to get a patient's eye view of the psychiatric profession for his thesis. And he apologizes for any inconvenience he may have caused.
Thank you. You've been a wonderful help, and thank you.
But to his surprise, the doctor's not buying this. To him, story is just further proof that our student is delusional and possibly dangerous. As the orderlies move to guide the student back to his room, he resists, and soon it's a full-on fight. Kicking and screaming, he cries out that it's all a big mistake, a joke. But the more frantic he gets, the more certain everyone is that he needs help. Finally sedated, he's brought into a secure room where he can't harm anyone, including himself. As the days and weeks pass, he continues to rail against the hospital, throwing regular fits over his false imprisonment. But nothing he does convinces them that he's telling the truth.
Hey, you gotta get me out of here, man. This guy, my roommate, he keeps grabbing my stuff.
Then, one day, his girlfriend wanders into the hospital and asks if anyone there has seen her boyfriend, who disappeared 3 weeks before. She explains about his plan to fake insanity.
Case 408.
She describes him, and the doctor immediately knows who it is she's talking about. Following him, the young woman finally locates her boyfriend, and she is horrified. After weeks of isolation, restraint, and drugs, he has descended into madness. his ruse has become reality. Though the doctors now know he wasn't a real mental patient, he can't be released in his current condition. The psychiatric hospital has driven him insane. A nightmare scenario. But did a graduate student really fake his way into a mental facility, only to end up as a patient? Or is this story just loony? There are a few ideas more terrifying than being a sane man consigned to a world of madness. And it all hinges on the fact that there is no absolute certainty about what constitutes insanity.
There's really no definitive way to know whether somebody is faking a mental illness. Usually what happens is when someone is faking a mental illness, they feign symptoms that are atypical.
Which means just talking crazy won't necessarily fool a modern psychologist. Still, the legend works because psychology has always been a work in progress. It has a history strewn with erroneous theories and terrible mistakes that have often put the mentally ill through a living hell. Fears of the profession linger to this day due to films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which popularized the notion that patients are treated more like criminals and mental hospitals are better at driving people mad than curing their ills. The legend traffics in anxieties that seem justified by places like the Glore Psychiatric Museum in Missouri. Originally opened in 1874 as State Lunatic Asylum No. 2, it's a sobering shrine to the dark ages of psychological ignorance.
We look at some of the treatments, even the treatments have been in the last few years, and we say, man, how barbaric could you have been to your fellow human being? They would try and maybe restrain folks. There was a lot of cages, cribs, the dungeon areas where they would strap somebody or chain somebody to the wall and just leave them there for hours or days.
All the more reminiscent of a torture chamber than a hospital. But as far back as the 1880s, reporter Nellie Bly bluffed her way into an asylum in New York to describe the abysmal conditions. And others have done it since then.
Orderly?
But nowadays, is it really possible for a sane man to be kept in a mental hospital given the cast of Looney Tunes running loose?
There are many instances, typically in criminal proceedings, where an individual attempts to fake insanity or present themselves as mentally ill. What they would typically do is try to present what they think are the characteristics of mentally ill people. Individuals who need to be psychiatrically hospitalized are typically people who suffer from serious psychiatric disturbance, who show psychotic symptoms, for example, delusions or hallucinations, who could be suicidal, dangerous to themselves otherwise, or dangerous to others. There are specific criteria that are established for institutionalizing someone, and it's never to be taken lightly. Certainly not to be done on the basis of a single interview.
Nevertheless, in the early 1970s, a group of college students successfully faked their way into a mental hospital and were detained for anywhere from a week to 2 months.
Hey, you guys, I know you think I'm crazy, all right? I'm not!
There have been people who have had themselves committed to mental institutions in order to do sociological and psychological work. And in the course of doing their research, they were accepted by the supervisory staff of the institution as being mentally incompetent and deserving of their place in the institution.
While this specific urban legend never happened, these true stories are sobering.
Once you're in that institution, you no longer are in control of your life. And that's a very frightening idea.
Trapped in the belly of the beast, the fictional student, whose stunt goes from inane to insane, is an icon of modern fears of faceless powers that control us all. The truth of the matter is, trying to get yourself committed is just plain nuts.
I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
In this story, a small room becomes a prison. But in our next legend, a small room becomes a grave. True or false? A man whose fingers were cut off when he lifted a running lawnmower sued the manufacturer and won. The answer? when we return. Did a man win a lawsuit after he lost his fingers while picking up a running lawnmower? False. Though the account is cited in several law texts, no such lawsuit has been brought to court.
A lot of urban legends are cautionary tales about the dangers women face in modern society. And what is perhaps most frightening is the idea that the most innocent of actions can produce the most horrifying results.
This story takes place at a hotel where a young businesswoman decides to check in after a long day on the road. After getting her room key from the desk clerk,
Thank you very much.
she brings her overnight bag to her room and heads on in. Once she's ready for bed, she thinks about the early morning ahead of her and decides to order her breakfast ahead of time and have it delivered when she wakes up. She fills out the order form with her name and menu selections and hangs it outside the door where the night staff will pick it up and have her breakfast ready first thing in the morning. Then she settles into bed for a much-needed sleep. Later, while the night staff is on duty, one gentleman makes his way down the hall and spots the room service order form. An early breakfast for one. Moments later, down in the lobby, the gentleman summons the night clerk, who just came on duty, and makes a request. He explains that he just got into town and that his wife is already in her room. He wonders if he could get a second room key so he can slip in without waking her up. The dutiful night clerk is happy to oblige. Back up in the hallway, he slides through the key card and opens the door. Inside, our businesswoman is sound asleep, completely undisturbed by the gentleman's quiet entrance. And the last thing he wants to do is wake her up. Early the next morning, the food service clerk arrives with her breakfast tray.
Room service.
After a few knocks and no answer,
Room service.
he figures she's probably in the shower. So he'll just slip the food inside the door.
And I got your breakfast here.
But when he enters the room, instead of a shower, he finds a bloodbath. The woman's body lies dead in her bed. She's been savagely murdered. Having learned from the room service menu that there was a single woman in the room, a stalking killer attacked her in the dead of night. But are there actually killers who use such information to gain the room keys of solitary women travelers? Or is this just a case where the facts don't check out? This legend emerged on the internet late in 1999, only months after 3 women were raped and murdered at Yosemite National Park by a handyman who worked at the motel where they stayed. The timing seems coincidental and makes the legend suspect, but it's believed because too many elements of the story are based in fact. With more women traveling alone than ever before, the opportunities for such stalkers have greatly increased.
You know, the number of women traveling for business has just grown dramatically. 30 years ago, less than 5% of women traveled for business. If you fast forward that to today, closer to 50% of business travelers are women, and even more so when it comes to leisure travel. In fact, the average adventure traveler now is a 47-year-old woman.
Another version of the legend has the woman duped by a killer who dresses up as the room service waiter, whom she would naturally let into the room.
Yes, can you put that right on the table?
But what are the safeguards against any versions of the legend taking place?
In a security operation, one of the things you want to do is have, obviously, a great life safety system in place in the hotel, which this facility does. When an individual checks into the hotel, whether they're alone or whether they're in a group, you're going to register at the front desk, and then you're going to be asked how many keys would you like for that room. Normally an individual carries one key. If they're asking for more than 1 or 2 keys, maybe 3 or 4 keys, that's going to set the front desk to thinking, well, what's the reason?
To test the hotel's security, we had one of our producers check in at the front desk.
Good afternoon.
Hey, I'm checking in.
And I just need your last name, please.
Last name's Large.
Wonderful. This is your room number. The last 3 digits are the number of the room. It'll be the 2nd floor. Enjoy your stay with us.
Thanks.
Then, we had another of our people try to get a key to the same room.
Mr. Large, unfortunately, I don't show your name on the reservation, so I'm unable to present a key to you.
Well, she's playing slots, she's busy or something. I know that she's out.
I understand.
He keeps insisting and demands to see the manager.
And he needs a key.
Mr. Large, your room number was?
Room number is 2026.
But the manager gives him the same message.
I am afraid, Mr. Large, like the young lady was telling you, due to security purposes, we're unable to issue you.
It seems that modern hotel security is effective after all. And this works against the urban legend because the story emerged recently, rather than long ago when security was much more lax. Making it even less likely are places like Magellan Travel Security, which specialize in technologies that protect the businesswoman on the road.
Magellan's offers products for travelers both domestic and international to keep them safe, happy, and healthy. Cut and run is a kind of theft where the thief will come up behind an unsuspecting person, grab their purse, cut the strap, and run away. What we offer is a kind of cut and run proof purse where there's a thread of stainless steel down the strap of the bag so that should someone come up, grab your purse, and try to cut it, they can't do it. We offer a doorstop alarm that fits under the bottom of the door just like a regular doorstop. However, when the door is open, an alarm sounds and it's really loud. It will alert not only you, but everyone else on the floor.
And you can even accessorize your security.
What you get is a security wallet. There's a couple of styles, one that fits under your shirt and one that fits down the front of your pants, and that's where you keep your valuables.
And in fact, because of these and other measures, the legend of the room disservice is untrue.
The hotel industry is waking up to the power of women traveling. They have added viewports to their doors. They've added extra locks to the doors. They are careful not to give the woman's name when she checks in so that other people in the lobby might hear her name and hear that she's alone.
It may only be a cautionary fable, but it is a sign of the times. Dead bodies are usually a shocking sight, but in our next legend, a dead body is part of the furniture. True or false? Ship captains have the authority to perform wedding ceremonies at sea. The answer when we return. Do ship captains have the authority to perform wedding ceremonies at sea? False. They may only do so if they are also a justice of the peace or hold a similar office in a church or state.
As the saying goes, absence makes the heart grow fonder. But in our following legend, absence becomes too much to bear, and it leads to a very strange solution.
Our story begins with a truly heart-rending scene. A man is at the side of his beloved wife, who is bedridden with heart disease, and it's close to the end. Through their tears, they pledge eternal devotion to one another. And with her dying words, the wife vows to her husband that she'll see him again in heaven. Then at last, she peacefully slips away. But her distraught husband is determined that death won't keep them apart. He's not ready to give her up. Heaven can wait. Days later, he arrives at the funeral home for a private viewing of his beloved wife. The sight of his bride lying lifeless in her coffin is more than the man can bear. he breaks down. His cries are so pitiful that the funeral director, long accustomed to such scenes, is moved himself. Deep in grief, the husband begs that the director not bury her in the cold, hard ground. She deserves better. The funeral director takes pity, and it occurs to him that there might just be one way for the man's wife to avoid such a fate.
It's a little extreme.
The heartbroken man is willing to try anything. And so, the following week, he holds a special memorial service at his home. The guests, all close friends and relatives, are there to support the grieving widow. But they all seem a bit ill at ease. The entire affair feels awkward. People don't seem to know what to do with themselves. Nothing makes them feel comfortable, and some of them decide to leave a bit early. Ironically, the happiest person in the room is the husband, who seems to have a new lease on life. And the reason is clear. Rather than commit his wife to the earth, he decided to preserve her remains in a hermetically sealed coffee table. Now his beloved will never be out of his sight. She'll stay with him for the rest of his days.
Oh, great.
The same can't be said for his friends, however. Gradually, they all find an excuse to beat a hasty retreat.
No, you want some? Really? You don't have to leave now.
And over the following weeks, our loyal husband finds that fewer and fewer of his friends and relatives are willing to drop by. Eventually, they stop coming altogether, but this doesn't seem to bother him, because he has his wife with him now. She's part of his life, and she always will be. A macabre but touching account of undying love. But did a man actually enshrine his dead wife in a glass coffee table? Or is this story transparently false?
You're welcome. Great. Have a seat. What do you think? Isn't she wonderful?
This legend has been kept alive on the internet since the early 1990s.
This particular story demonstrates, on one level, our desire to commemorate those who die, who are close to us, our pain at witnessing change. A person has a sense of control over the uncontrollable, which is the loss of almost everybody you're connected with, unless you die before them.
The fact that many spend big money on everything from costly mausoleums to creative-looking urns that hold cremation ashes all support the idea that people can be very ambitious about holding on to the dead. Monuments like the Taj Mahal illustrate how far some men are willing to go to honor their departed wives with a shrine. But the legend suggests an interest in the dead that goes to an unhealthy extreme. An intact cadaver is, after all, a bizarre choice for home decor. Would anyone really do this?
Human beings throughout history have tended to believe that their ancestors still exist after they die on some level. By keeping the body around, it's a tangible symbol of this essence which many of us believe persists.
This woman, from the Foray tribe of Papua New Guinea, wears the foot of her deceased husband around her neck as an enduring symbol of her affection. And the tribe in general has honored its dead through cannibalism. By eating the brains of their deceased men, people with no material means of enshrining ancestors turn their own bodies into living mausoleums. But while the motives driving these people are the same as the man in the legend requires that the dead body remain intact. Is this even possible? Well, preserving corpses is an ancient preoccupation. From the mummies of Egypt to these 20th century Buddhist monks, whose remains are mysteriously preserved under glass without any special treatment at all. Even Lenin, founder of the Soviet Union, has been enshrined in a glass case for over 80 years. And if this isn't long enough, the Life Extension Foundation in Scottsdale, Arizona, uses cryogenic storage tanks to keep your dreams of immortality on ice.
The patients can basically sit in there forever
because the temperatures are so cold, there's no molecular activity going on. For every second of room temperature decay at liquid nitrogen, you're looking at 24.5 million years. The temperatures we're looking at is minus 196 Celsius, minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit.
When a patient dies, the blood is washed out and replaced with an organic preservation solution. Sometimes the heads are surgically removed to be preserved alone. The bodies are put in a sleeping bag, placed in a vacuum, and supercooled with silicone oil over dry ice, all under computer control. Even legendary baseball star Ted Williams keeps his cool inside one of these cryogenic tanks. If people go to such lengths to preserve the flesh of the dead, isn't the legend entirely plausible? Well, there are problems with the story. While Lenin's tomb might make the tale persuasive, the fact is his body has to be re-embalmed every 18 months. The legend never suggests the trophy wife is that high maintenance. Could an embalmed body last in an airtight container?
It would not preserve the body if the person were sealed in an airtight environment because, for example, dehydration would change the appearance of the body. An embalmed person will look good for the viewing, but then as time goes on and the person has been buried, they start to look a little less like they did in life.
Furthermore, there are laws against personal possession of human remains. The legend is merely an internet hoax, but it's alive and well because it deals with a classic element of urban legend.
No, you want some? Really? You don't have to leave now? No, we're good.
This is a legend that trades on a graphic image. The dead person in the living room. It's an incongruity between spaces. The dead are generally taken far away from the places of the living to be deposited in graveyards and cemeteries. Here, it's brought right into the center of social life, and that's a fairly graphic and dramatic image.
This is a story in which the dead are mourned. But in another legend, a death is anticipated. True or false? Bobbing for apples began as a ritual by which a woman could learn whom she should marry. The answer, when we return. Did bobbing for apples begin as a ritual to suggest to young women the man they should marry? It's true. It was done as a form of divining, to forecast the future.
Some legends involve foreign practices that seem bizarre to people from Western cultures. But is our following story a true account, or just an example of cultural ignorance?
This story takes place somewhere in the Middle East, on the eve of a traditional Muslim wedding. A well-to-do young gentleman has decided to take a second wife. According to some Islamic traditions, a man may have up to 4 wives, if he can afford them. This man is about to be introduced to his second bride-to-be in a meeting arranged by his father. In accordance with tradition, the girl must be accompanied by at least one male relative, in this case, her uncle. He arrives bearing a gift, and the greetings are extended between the uncle and the father. It's the 2 senior gentlemen who will conduct this meeting. The husband and bride-to-be are not permitted to interact. As a gesture of hospitality, everyone is invited to tea, with the young couple positioned opposite each other. The elders begin discussing details of the upcoming ceremony. And it's then that the young man's first wife appears to serve the tea. Everything is cordial and according to tradition, except for one unspoken problem. Our young husband's first wife is not happy about her spouse taking on a second wife. But she dare not object in front of the men. It's then that the young girl's uncle grants her permission to accompany the first wife out of the room to be prepared for the upcoming ceremony. Both women then exit the room and leave the men to their conversation. Sometime later, the first wife and her hairdresser friend of many years work together outfitting the girl for the ceremony. She's a lovely young thing, which makes it even more infuriating to the first wife. But she has no choice in the matter. When the hairdresser positions a traditional hairpiece, the young woman winces from sharp stabs as hairpins are roughly shoved into place. Again and again, the girl's scalp is stung, and she begins to think the hairdresser is deliberately hurting her. But she remains silent. When everything is in place, she's anxious to see the results. But as she stands, she feels dizzy. She can't focus her eyes. Then she loses consciousness and collapses to the floor. It's immediately apparent that she has suddenly died. Later, as her body is taken out of the house, the husband comes home and is baffled by what is going on. Totally confused, he's guided into the next room by his wife, who sits him down and explains that his young bride-to-be has unexpectedly died of a heart attack. It was not meant to be. What his wife doesn't confess is that she conspired with the hairdresser to slip a deadly scorpion into the hairpiece before it was placed on the girl's head. It was the scorpion, rather than hairpins, that were stinging her scalp. The husband is totally distraught, even as his wife is quietly pleased. A strange tale of jealousy. But is it true, or a fable based on stereotypes and ignorance? While this story deals with old traditions, the legend is a recent one, surfacing in October of 2000. And it gets our attention because of the unique method of murder. But even if a jealous wife were motivated to do this, is death by scorpion credible or a cliché?
Scorpions worldwide seem to share some common properties of their venom. That is, that these are neurotoxins. During the first 24 hours after someone's been stung, neurotoxins increase the heart rate, increase the blood pressure, and cause us to have respiratory problems, even going on to pulmonary edema, a life-threatening respiratory condition.
Their venom is even potent enough to be milked for use in medicine. But not all scorpions produce neurotoxins.
When we get into the Middle East area, we see that they are more cardiotoxic, and it's believed that many of these scorpions are more life-threatening than what we have here in North America.
Which not only makes the legend possible, but also reinforces its Middle Eastern setting. But what about the motive behind the murder?
The feeling of jealousy probably is uniform throughout cultures, but things that would spark jealousy definitely change from culture to culture, depending on what's acceptable and what's not.
And the legend is suspect, because the older wife has a very Western attitude toward the idea of a second wife in the family. Yet the tale is set in an Islamic culture, where some traditions permit multiple wives. In this context, wouldn't the first wife be more accepting of the new bride than the legend suggests? Even in the West, a trio of committed cohabitants in Northern California doesn't feel that 3 is a crowd. As professional relationship counselors, Maeve, Jerry, and Orv have to use their own expertise to figure out how to make it all work under one roof.
It really was like any other relationship. We had an attraction for one another, spiritual, heartfelt, emotional, physical.
It was a little challenging at first to work out the logistics. 2 nights a week, Orv sleeps in my room with me, and 2 nights a week with Maeve, and then during the weekend, sometimes we sleep together, sometimes we don't.
But this triad is about much more than sleeping arrangements.
I think there were a lot of commonalities, like we liked the outdoors, we liked sex, we liked the same kind of music, and we just spent a lot of time camping and being on the water, and we just really worked well together.
Certainly, if they are able to make room for each other under one roof, people raised in a culture where polygamy is more acceptable should have an even easier time of it. But perhaps this is all based on a Western misunderstanding of Islam.
The idea of multiple wives in Islam goes back to Prophet Muhammad. He very specifically said that the man should take 4 wives if and only if he can provide for all of them and if he can treat all of them equally.
The practice was permitted to provide protection for widows in wartime. Today, less than 2% of Muslim marriages are polygamous, and its acceptance varies from country to country. But there's one fact that's universal: men are men.
Well, the reality is men can be forgetful of their first or second wife as they get new wives.
And like anyone else, a Muslim wife can get pretty riled if she's made to feel like a third wheel. The fact is, the tale of the scorpion wig is based on actual Middle Eastern accounts, reprinted in the German press in October of 2000. It supposedly took place in Yemen, one of the most conservative of Islamic societies. The young bride was said to have died of 24 scorpion stings to her scalp. The problem is, the story's hard to verify. This is one legend where the facts show that the account might be fiction, or it could be mostly true. In this story, death is caused by a bite. But in our next legend, death is caused by a gag. True or false? The word democracy appears nowhere in the U.S. Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. The answer, when we return. Is the word democracy found nowhere in the U.S. Constitution or the Declaration of Independence? It's true. Many of the Founding Fathers regarded democracy as rule by the rabble.
Just when you thought you'd heard every outrageous story imaginable, along comes a new urban legend like the following, to challenge our truth detectors and make us wonder if it's fiction or reality.
This twisted little tale begins with a henpecked husband who has reached the end of his rope. Berated and badgered by his relentlessly demanding wife, his marriage has turned into one long dog.
Got things to do. I know, but I've got things to do too.
On this day, his wife lays out a long list of duties she expects him to finish by the time she gets back from a trip to her mother's.
I'm gonna do this damn thing whenever I want to.
And she leaves him with a final suggestion.
You might as well drop dead for all the good you are.
Have a nice trip, dear.
Furious at his predicament, he needs to do something to put an end to all this. And he hatches an idea. Over the next 2 days, he works up a little project which he thinks will straighten out his wife's attitude once and for all. Later, when his wife returns, she's not happy. One look around makes it clear that her better half didn't do any of the chores she assigned. And she's going to lower the boom. But no sooner does she track down her disobedient spouse than she finds him dangling from a hangman's noose. And it's more than she can handle. She passes out cold. What she didn't realize was that her mischievous man faked his suicide to rattle her into finally appreciating him. A little fainting spell might do her good. Then, just as he considers extricating himself from the noose, in comes his next-door neighbor, who heard the wife's scream. Our henpecked husband decides to have a little fun with him as well, and plays possum. For a moment, the astonished neighbor takes in the ghastly scenario. His first reaction is to call the police. But then, something catches his eye. It's the husband's autographed baseball, which he caught at a pennant game years before. The neighbor has always been envious of this little collectible. And now he figures that since there's no one left to enjoy it, and the cops won't notice it missing, why not take it for himself? Who's gonna care? Well, our hanging husband, for one. He's so outraged that his neighbor would swipe his prized possession from under his dead body that he responds with an angry kick.
You piece of trash! You've had your grubby little fingers all.
The neighbor goes into shock at the sight of the dead man come to life, his heart seizes up,
That's right.
and he dies.
Al?
An altogether bizarre scenario.
Al?
But did a practical joker really cause a thieving neighbor to suffer a fatal heart attack?
Help!
Or is this story just dead wrong? This odd little legend has been hanging around at least since 1979, and it's immediately suspect because of a small joke embedded in the story.
Is there something wrong? I heard somebody scream.
For some reason, this story is always said to have occurred in Hungary, but it may be that there's a pun involved, Hungary, but that's pure speculation.
While faking one's death sounds like a movie plot, it does really happen, both here and abroad.
A lot of the life insurance scams occur overseas, where the death is alleged to be in another country.
So the idea that the perpetrator was Hungarian might make sense after all. But this 1865 photograph of a public execution shows how much work it takes to hang people for real. How much tougher would it be to fake being hanged when in fact you're alive and kicking? We found this out in the process of staging our reenactment of the legend.
We start with a rig that can telescope up and down. From the cable, we're going to dress the hanging rope, the dummy rope. There's not going to actually be any tension on that rope because that's going to be sitting around his neck. The more obvious dangers would be to put it on something that's not supposed to be hung by, like your neck or vital parts.
Ready? Okay, I'm off.
I don't think a person, a layman, a novice, could pull this off, especially safely. There's too many factors involved that people don't know about until it's too late.
Of course, in the legend, the one who gets hurt is the light-fingered neighbor who is literally scared to death because a corpse comes back to life.
You had your eyes on that ball.
But how easy is it to actually scare someone to death?
When somebody is scared, the adrenaline levels will go up, and then the effect on the heart will be that the heart rate will go up and the muscle will contract more forcefully. Basically, a normal heart will resist any of the negative effects of adrenaline. But if somebody does have an underlying cardiac disorder, this is the way in which somebody could be scared to death.
To put this theory to the test, we sent our reality checker, Bob Harris, to the California Speedway for a little thrill ride from Driving 101.
To see if it's possible for someone to be literally frightened to death, what more logical thing than make me confront my own worst fear, which is high-speed driving. We checked my heart rate and blood pressure, found them to be relatively normal, even a bit low. Carefully inserted me into the racing machine. Blasted me around the track at ridiculous rates of speed that no human should have to suffer ever again. And then extracted me from said vehicle. Rechecking my heart rate and blood pressure, we found them to be dramatically increased.
And your pulse rate's about 130.
Facing death is rather exciting.
Occasionally, there are certain electrical rhythm vulnerabilities that occur in people who have no underlying heart disease. It's a rare condition, but it can occur.
Which suggests the story is true, but it's not. It never happened in Hungary or anywhere else, but it does have a message.
Help! What the story is really talking about is a sort of a cautionary warning that one shouldn't play practical jokes because they can boomerang.
More than most urban legends, this one's a risky way to get your kicks.
Separating fact from fable isn't a simple task. And part of the allure of these stories is how credible they seem, even when they're not. We hope that the past hour has helped you hone your skills at determining what you see as fiction and what is mostly true.